Jonathan Rosenbaum, author of Discovering Orson Welles.
And I'm James Naremore. I wrote a book called The Magic World of Orson Welles, and I'm very happy to be working with Jonathan again on another Orson Welles movie. This is, I suppose, what we could call the second version of Touch of Evil, at least the second one that was, after the original release, this was discovered.
Yes, it was found in the mid-'70s, and it's 15 minutes longer. But we should emphasize right now that there's no such thing as a director's cut, nor could there be, of Touch of Evil. This is just another version that was found. It has more material by Welles, but also more material that's not by Welles. Although one other thing that's important to add is, of all of Welles' films that were tampered with, this probably suffered the least from tampering compared with the others.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things, of course, we're seeing that he didn't originally plan is that the credits are showing over this sequence, which he wanted without the credits. Also, it's not clear that he would have wanted Henry Mancini's music. He seems to have had the idea of giving us a kind of montage of sounds coming from the street. By the way, we're in the main drag of Venice, California, sort of tricked out to look like a U.S.-Mexican border town. And we're looking at an incredibly long, elaborate crane shot. The photographer for this film is Russell Meddy, a contract photographer at Universal, and he was well known for his use of crane shots. And there were probably more crane shots in this movie than any other by Welles, and Welles does a great job of organizing them and the choreography of them.
Yeah, this is the most famous shot in the film, really, the opening shot, and it's even been alluded to, like in The Player by Robert Altman. There's a whole homage to it. But Welles himself was much prouder of another couple of shots he did later in the film, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
because this is a kind of thing that calls attention to itself, whereas he thought that the most effective virtuoso work was the kind that wasn't noticed by the audience.
This shot, we would notice, is not simply a flamboyant tracking shot. It also has to do with the theme of the film. One of the original titles was Borderline for this film, and the film is very much about the ambiguous border between the U.S. and Mexico. We're being introduced to the two leading characters, Heston and Janet Leigh, who are representatives of either side of the border, and there's a kind of racial or ethnic theme running through this film, too. We'll see this in a moment.
Yes, and there's a lot of interesting kind of doubling effects. Like we have two different couples on different sides of the screen here that represent almost like opposite poles in the way of the film.
Mr. Vargas, hot on the trail of another dope ring?
Hot on the trail of a chocolate soda for my wife.
Your wife?
Barely your bride, officer.
The shot ends in an interesting way. Our romantic couple are going to drift over to the side and kiss, and it's almost as though the kiss between the Mexican character and the woman from Philadelphia sets off racial tensions and all sort of stuff underneath this. And the timing of the kiss is important in relation to the explosion.
This has got to be Orson Welles' most politically incorrect movie, which is one of its strengths, I think.
Yes, and it is very much a political movie.
Do you realize I haven't kissed you in over an hour?
Now, with that explosion, the film shatters into a montage. We might want to keep in mind that this film was shot not too long after the Supreme Court desegregation decision in 1954. The integration of Little Rock High School had taken place. The civil rights movement was begun, and Welles had a long history of being involved in activities of that sort. And in this case, he completely transformed the novel that this film is based on and made it into, I think, an indirect commentary on racial tensions in the United States, even though blackness does not figure in the film.
Yeah, there's practically no allusion at all to any racism in the novel, which is a rather conventional novel, actually, that had been purchased by Universal and already scripted by somebody else before Welles came and kind of transformed it.
The racial politics are complicated in this film, interesting to talk about. By today's standards, the film could be criticized because Charlton Heston is doing a kind of masquerade here. There's not a Mexican actor playing a Mexican. Nevertheless, the racial stereotypes to some degree in this film are intentional, and it becomes a kind of racial nightmare, this film.
Coming up, Brandy's? It's Thursday. I'd hope to go back in the morning plane, but no.
You mean this business?
I'm afraid so.
That bomb came from the Mexican side of the border.
The car did.
Wow.
Now, after conversation about the explosion, we start to do parallel editing, where the film shifts back from two different locales, where Heston is taking up the legal investigation, and Janet Leigh is entering into a sexual part of the plot.
Yes, and this cross-cutting was one of the causes of the studio interference, because they thought the cross-cutting was too complicated and they wanted it simplified. So this was one of the reasons for part of the recutting that was done later. Although Wells was present for the cutting in the whole first stages, it was just he was left out or kept out of the cutting in the latter stages.
Talk to you about.
La güera no entiende que tengo algo para su esposo.
Janet Leigh calls the leather-jacketed fellow here, who, by the way, is as an actor, is named Valentin de Vargas, and the character Susie here is married to a man named Vargas. She calls him Pancho. She's sort of aggressive about abusing their race, even though she's married to a Mexican. They come from more higher-class parts of the U.S. and Mexico.
Yeah, so it's a kind of an unconscious class thing, and as well as a racial thing.
Here comes the DA. Where's Captain Quinlan?
And here we're beginning to see some old pals of Wells from the Mercury Theater days.
Ray Collins.
This is Ray Collins. And we'll see a couple of others here as this scene develops. Harry Shannon was in
Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane.
Kane's father.
Yeah, and here this fellow in the foreground is in costume Joseph Cotton.
Yes, being dubbed here by Orson Welles, though, not his own voice.
I gather that Welles had some kind of superstition about wanting Cotton in his movies. He thought that the movies might succeed more if Cotton was in them. So,
I know he snuck him even into one shot, I think, of Othello.
Yeah, he's in Othello, that's right, yeah. He doesn't get any credit in this film. It's just some friends of his showing up. And Welles' own entry into the film, he's introduced as our local police celebrity. There's a sort of self-referentiality to his entrance into the film.
And I think we can already see that he's playing a kind of like a racist Southern cop, even though it's in a Mexican border town, that there's that connotation also.
The producer of this film, Alfred Zugsmith, had worked with Welles the year before this in a movie directed by Jack Arnold called Man in the Shadow, where Welles played another sort of tyrannical, big, menacing, racist character. Welles, in fact, wrote his dialogue for that film. And I think this film is related in certain ways to that previous film, which is not as good as, by any means, as this one.
Let her go and put a tail on her. Oh, geez, there was some Jane, that Rudy Lennox.
Just some striptease.
Well, what do you know? The DA. In a monkey.
Welles is usually photographed here from very low angles in order to emphasize his sort of whale-like size. The makeup is wonderful. It's one of the most persuasive jobs of
and there's a
makeup
lot of padding too. He was not that big, actually.
Yeah.
He actually put on some extra poundage for this part. I mean, artificial.
Yeah. And one of the things you'll notice is that when his antagonist here, Vargas, is photographed, often the camera is low as well, but Vargas is often shot in tracking shots that emphasize a sort of dynamic movement forward and backward, whereas Quinlan has a cane and shambles and moves slowly.
Intuition, he calls it.
Vargas has a theory that the murder itself was committed outside of our
These two characters posed against one another in the film are part of a pattern that Welles started very early in his career with the modern dress Julius Caesar, where we get a sort of liberal and progressive character posed over against a quasi-fascist or proto-fascist or tyrannical character. And Welles is always on the side of the liberal character. But maybe because Welles plays the other character, he tends to humanize that other character. And so therefore, the emotional qualities of the film are a little bit at variance with the political ones, and that's one of the things that makes it interesting.
Well, there's always an ambivalence in Welles. He's like a modernist who's against modernity in so many ways.
Now we're going to meet Akim Tamirov, who worked with Welles very often late in his career, and
was one of his best friends and also one of his favorite actors.
And a great actor. And he's very good at this sort of comic grotesque, which Welles uses him for a lot in this film. His accent is not really Mexican, but he's terrific in this. And again,
it's supposed to be an Italian family, though, in Mexico.
Yeah. And this establishes a little bit about Susie, too. She's not the wilting wife. She's spunky. She's spirited. She has a joke. She calls him a two-bit Little Caesar when he's smoking a cigar here and looking a little like Edward G. Robinson.
Incidentally, it's worth pointing out that Janet Leigh actually told me this when we were working on the third version, that there were rehearsals in which she jotted down improvs, and some of those lines from those improvs are hers that were actually jotted down during this particular, during those rehearsals, just before the shooting.
We should mention that she had a broken arm.
Actually, it happened before.
Yes, yeah, and she's concealing it here with a coat here, and they had to do that quite a bit here.
Right, people would not notice unless you knew it, but one of her arms is broken throughout the entire film.
Yeah, you know what's wrong with you, Mr. Grandy? You've been seeing too many gangster movies. Mike may be spoiling some of your fun.
Mike?
My husband, yeah.
The film has this delirious, nightmarish, but also darkly funny quality, and here it's played, I think, very close to burlesque. And Janet Leigh is quite good at this sort of thing. She wasn't cast this way very often. I think in The Manchurian Candidate she's used this way. There's a little bit something hard-boiled about her that you don't suspect, and she can stand up to these other characters.
Yeah, it's a very peculiar scene because on the one hand it would seem like it's sinister, but and in some ways it goes against that.
Yeah.
You don't know whether to take it as comedy or as straight.
Right.
Which is true of a lot of the film, that he's actually playing around with our expectations and Wells, and so that I think that our attitudes towards the two characters remains, I think, kind of ambivalent.
But in a minute I'll start to yell.
I wouldn't do that, senor.
The figure in the background, of course, is sinister looking, but yet Tamirov adds this comedy to it, almost a burlesque.
This was a quiet, peaceful town here, and now this Vargas comes.
We used to have a nice, peaceful town here. Of course, we're looking at an incredible Sin City.
You gave it to me?
I think it's time for him to lay off my brother in Mexico City. That's advice.
It's never clear to me why Vargas and his wife are in this border town. It's a very strange place to be having a honeymoon. And the film never bothers really to explain it, except to hint that maybe Vargas is there to clean up drugs on the dirty border. But it seems a very odd place
well, since they have a car, maybe they drove up and they're staying overnight before they keep going. And,
but there's something very weird about
yeah.
taking your wife here for their honeymoon.
Yes, it's true. It just seems like it's purely circumstantial. They just happen to be there.
Yeah.
But they obviously they're checked into a hotel, so they've stopped over, and they have a car. So
by the way, that scene when Janet Leigh leaves the room and you cut to the low angle on Tamirov, he's licking his lips. There's a kind of motif of this lip licking, which is going to be emphasized much stronger later in the film.
Quinlan, we just can't cross over into Mexico like this.
Thousands do every day.
Tourists, but...
So we're tourists.
So there's a crossing of the border now. There's continual references to crossing the border,
right?
Which is it's more than just a metaphor. It's almost like what the whole movie is about.
Right. It seems to me that I don't want to make too big a difference between this, but in Welles' earlier films like Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons, the cutting always emphasizes now versus then. Whereas in this movie, because the time is much closer, it's brilliant editing around the idea of here versus there. And sometimes we don't really know what side of the border we're on.
Wait till I tell you, the craziest thing.
Who's the Jane?
His wife.
Oh, how do you know? She don't look Mexican either.
The idea of the border, it's a border of nationalities. You
Yes.
get the sense that the U.S. exploits Mexico, that rich automobile coming over to the U.S. side when we open the film. It's a border of nationalities, but it's also a border of other kinds of things, a border of races or ethnicities, which you're getting a sense of here, and of
Jim,
sexes.
one thing to point out before it's off is that this is a sequence not directed by Wells in the lobby.
This is one of the Harry Keller scenes?
That's right. This was done during the retakes after principal photography when they had to explain more of the plot.
Yeah.
And Wells was not allowed to shoot this material. Charlton Heston very heroically spent over $8,000 delaying these retakes by one day to help Wells, even though it didn't wind up helping him that much. But it just shows how much committed he was to Wells at the time.
And you can see that little scenes we just saw was the most conventionally shot sequence we've seen so far in the movie. And here's a good example of this using the wide-angle lens with a tracking camera that gives Vargas the sense always of moving forward in some very powerful way.
Over here, Vargas. We're going in the back way.
To me, one of the most exciting camera movements is about to come in this when there's a kind of chase that's coming in just a moment.
Yes?
I think it's the critic Stephen Heath who points out that now Zita, the sizzling stripper, is literally sizzling.
Yes.
The image is Joy Lansing, who had worked with Wells on television about this.
That's right, The Fountain of Youth.
Yes,
I hardly knew.
Okay, come on.
Yes. And I'm not finished with you yet.
Again and again, the camera never stands still. The levels are interesting, and he's always throwing little jokes in. The cameo appearance here of Zsa Zsa Gabor as a madam.
Yeah, which I've heard it rumored that she was in the film because of Albert Zugsmith rather than because of Wells, but I'm not sure of that.
Wasting our time around here.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
And now we're going to move from this modern house of prostitution to an old house of prostitution where Wells is going to hear the sound of a pianola. And we're going to get introduced to Marlene Dietrich, who was an old friend of Wells.
It was actually kind of smuggled into the movie. She was not part of the cast. It was something that even the studio personnel did not know about until they saw the rushes.
Yeah. This town is so seedy that the air is just full of blowing garbage, and yet here in the midst of it is this kind of island of nostalgia. And I think it's another of Wells's favorite themes, this idea of modernity being a falling away of from
Yeah, and
some,
you've got that oil well at the same time. You've got that old-fashioned thing in the foreground of the house.
Maybe she'll cook chili for him or bring out the crystal ball.
Maybe she'll cook chili for him or bring out the crystal ball. That sort of reminds me of Citizen Kane.
Yes.
And this room reminds me of the elder Kane's possessions. They're the littered things that remind him of a youth. And here is the great Dietrich. It may seem strange to some people that she's in a masquerade or something here, this very Germanic woman dressed as a gypsy. But she always breaks my heart in this movie, maybe because I'm nostalgic for her Sternberg films that Wells is referring to here. I like the Henry Mancini music, too. It's so corny, it's good.
Yeah, although it's used differently somewhat in the re-edit that came afterwards, and it changes the tenor of the scene somewhat. Yeah, because audiences laughed at this sequence, some of the dialogue, initially, and then when the music was removed, they don't so much. So it's interesting how it changes certain things.
Often audiences, I don't mean to appear superior to them, but sometimes when audiences laugh at a thing, it's because it's unconventional. They're not used to it. And this is unconventional, and to me it works wonderfully.
That's true. I just mean that there's been a change in taste about this film over the years, that back in the early 60s, for example, it was treated, a lot of it, as camp. Which, of course, it's not seen that way at all now. But it just shows you something about changing taste.
Well, I think one could argue that parts of it are deliberately camp, but we often associate camp with badness or shallowness or something, and that's not the case. Camp can be
It's hyperbolic.
A very good aesthetic strategy. On occasions in this film, I think that's true.
Anything about that bomb, have you?
That happened on your side of the border.
In a place like this, you hear things.
We're getting to know something about Quinlan, and he's already been established as a racist character, and everything he says in these early scenes we tend to be appalled by, but this scene humanizes him. It gives us a sense of a past he has, that somebody could really care for him.
Hank! Oh, Hank! Come out here.
What do you want?
The way he's framed against that bull against the wall, too, is an interesting point. Wells will return to that.
What kind of trouble? Where? Where did it happen?
In the alley behind the nightclub.
Yeah?
This scene that's coming up, and perhaps even this shot, is material that was not in the original release. There's a whole dialogue sequence here that original audiences did not see, and is an important one in establishing the tension between Quinlan and Vargas.
Yes, I think this is one of several reasons why there are things in this film that I prefer to the original release.
Intuition.
Intuition?
More Vargas and his...
One of the conflicts here is justice versus, or legality versus intuition, or versus my ability to be king politics in this town. And at first the border between those things seem to be drawn very clearly, but as the film goes along, they will be blurred. Justice versus pragmatism, rules versus passion. guilt versus legal responsibility. All these things get mixed up together in this film.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Wells was very uncategorical about the fact that his position in the film, in terms of what he believed in, was everything Vargas says, not anything that Hank Quinlan says. But of course, because he's playing Hank Quinlan, some people, including a lot of the French critics, intuited that somehow Quinlan was superior to Vargas, and for Wells this was a fascist argument,
yes.
And he rejected it, even though he obviously tried to bring some kind of sympathy and density to the part that he was playing.
I think I remember reading, Jonathan, and you may know this, Wells was referring to somebody in the Soviet Union seeing the film and
yes, Yudkovich.
And thinking of it as a fascist film.
Well, they were calling it decadent.
Yeah.
And in other words, assuming that that it was, whereas Wells was saying that they didn't realize that this film was kind of protesting against it or commenting on it, rather than just being decadent itself.
Yeah.
But of course, as was pointed out to me by Yuri Tsivian, you know, there could have been all sorts of ideological reasons why he was sort of like, they felt obliged to say something like that might not even have been sincere at the time. Because, I mean, you know, it was a kind of thing so we have to kind of take some of these things with a grain of salt, actually.
Yeah. But audiences could misinterpret this film as, you say, politically incorrect even to the right, whereas it's, to me, clearly not.
It's very funny because I saw this film when it came out, and I have to admit, it did not make a big impression at the time, unlike Othello when I saw it on television. I'm not sure why, but maybe because I was reading it so much in terms of the genre that I wasn't aware of as a young teenager of technique in the same way.
To me, it had exactly the opposite effect. I saw this when it first came out, and I saw it in Lake Charles, Louisiana, at the height of the civil rights movement, and I thought it was making some statement about the violence of those times. It's
shows how much different you were than me.
Yeah.
You were a little bit older.
But I was mesmerized by it, and I thought it was a great film then, and I think it is now too. Susie is going to be subjected to a series of taunts and increasing levels of sexual violence. And always Vargas, at this point, in relation to these scenes, begins to appear a little too stiff, a little neglectful of his wife.
Square, yeah.
Yeah. Once again, the balance between the good guy and the bad guy gets ambiguated.
This way!
This is a very strange sequence, and you know that thing with the flashlight reminds me of a sequence in Metropolis. You know when there's the flashlight as a kind of voyeuristic scene of aggression. And look at all the things it's doing with light. You know, like she's taking out the bulb and throwing it at him, and then this becomes the source of a misunderstanding between her and her husband. It's very interesting the way the film plays on little things like this that create a kind of sense of restlessness where everything is in constant motion, where we're never quite sure where the grounding is, and the characters aren't either.
The film is also playing on a kind of comedy here of young newlyweds misunderstanding one another, and it's in such a gruesome and grotesque environment that it becomes darkly funny.
Wait there! Your control is plenty mad. He wants to talk to you. Stop the back here.
I think even the way the Grandy family here is being treated, they're almost like some kind of slapstick in a Three Stooges movie. And I mean that in a good sense here.
There's so many different levels. Like at one point in this scene, I think he says, "What a setup." And some people interpreted this as Wells commenting on his own situation of making this movie, you know?
Told you to throw acid at Vargas. Who is the boss of this family? Who is the boss?
My old man.
Yeah, Vic, sure, but he's in the pen.
The Grandy family operate on both sides of the border. Quinlan, because he's a U.S. character with a lot of power in this town, it's interesting how all the other politicians are afraid of him, and they become anxious whenever he's around. He's able to move freely back and forth between the border.
Don't do that!
You locked the rug, Uncle Joe.
Apparently, the whole thing about his toupee was not even in the script. It was something that was kind of like worked out in the shooting.
And Wells gets a lot of fun out of that.
I can just imagine your mother's face if she could see our honey.
I think most of the scenes in the lobby are sequences that were not done by Wells.
Susie, will you please tell me why you're leaving?
Senor Vargas. Moment. Does this mean you're taking that early plane back to Mexico?
That piece of dialogue has always been interesting to me, where he says, "I can just imagine your mother's face if she saw our honeymoon hotel. She's from Philadelphia, he's from Mexico City. There's something about this location that operates as sort of the unconscious of these two societies. It's the place where everything about those two societies comes to the surface and becomes a nightmare.
Who told you?
I just wanted to give that.
I've always thought that sequence we just saw looked like Wells to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Maybe this is a spot to say that the fellow who's directing the non-Wells material is a man named Harry Keller, who was a contract director at Universal. At about this time, he was doing a lot of television stuff for Universal. He photographed a lot of episodes of the Loretta Young Show on television and so forth. Never became very well known, but he was obviously a guy they could call on to fill in.
Yeah, and it was all done in one day.
Yeah.
I mean, all the extra stuff. And it was, again, it was all, most of it had to do with trying to make the plot clear, at least, or that was the stated reason for doing it.
Wells has done a wonderful job with this location. If I'm correct, we're on Wentworth Avenue in Venice, and some of that looks still the same today, that sort of pseudo-Venetian architecture that you see along the way. But he's transformed this into, it seems to me, a very convincing border town and made it like what one's dream image of a nightmare border town would be like.
And there's another exploitation of that sort of like the idea of fantasies of miscegenation,
Yes,
that type
exactly.
of thing.
Yeah.
In that photograph.
And the film is going to play on that very deliberately.
Time to take you to the airport. Perhaps that would be best just for a few days.
I don't think so.
But just a minute ago...
A minute ago, I said a lot of things. But now I think the best thing is...
The married couple is worried for each other's safety, but there are things they can't say to each other.
Susie...
There's an awful lot of comedy in this case about the repression, you can almost say, which is contrasted by the seediness of the Grundy family, who are clumsy, but at the same time not so uninhibited.
Well, there must be one somewhere on the American side of the border.
The American side of the border.
So here they're talking about whole concern about whether she stays in an American hotel or in a Mexican hotel.
Yes. Yeah. He's already apologized for being here. At the border towns, he says, bring out the worst in a country. So he feels self-conscious about what's happening.
If I go to the American motel, it's just for comfort. Not for safety.
And here I will have an opportunity to talk about this some more, but there are an amazing number of affinities between this movie and Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock movie, which was made after this. In both movies, Janet Leigh is going to run into trouble in a motel.
Yes.
Almost whenever Janet Leigh says, I'm going to a motel, we can't...
And with a crazy nightman, no less.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I guess you were really hurt. And without laying a hand on him.
It's interesting that the only family in this movie is this family, which I think is some kind of strange comment in a way.
Yeah.
And that wife of his had never been born.
I think Wells does a very good job in this movie of suggesting the changing patterns of light on a single day. You really do feel very often he's got the time. And this is obviously not by Wells. This is a process screen shot later by Keller.
The way he's made up is so obviously different. Janet Leigh told me, they didn't really like doing this stuff, but they had to under contract. They would have preferred, to have insisted that Wells shoot it, but they were powerless to really change the decision. And this was because Wells started off getting along very well with the higher-ups, and then it gradually deteriorated. Once they asked him to stay away from the editing, and then he ran off to Mexico to start work on Don Quixote, things really started deteriorating. And it's very interesting, because Don Quixote was his own film, completely independent.
Yes.
And I think they got more and more alienated from Wells, until a time came when they wouldn't even let him come on and do this extra work.
You've talked to Heston. I corresponded with him briefly, and when I said that this was not by Wells, but probably by Harry Keller, he said, no, I don't remember Harry Keller ever being involved in this film. But then when I asked him to look at it, he did, and he says, oh, you're right, yeah.
Well, yeah, and in fact, if you look at his journals when he's talking about it, it's quite clear. But I think he was something he would have preferred to have forgotten because he was struggling hard for Wells, and it was a battle he lost. He did the same thing for Peckinpah, by the way. He spent a lot of money taking a lower salary, which he suffered from, to help Peckinpah out. So he was quite heroic in that way and very unusual as a Hollywood leading actor.
His politics changed over his life, but he was always a marvelous actor and somebody who was committed to his notions of art.
What's important, which you haven't mentioned, is he's the one who got Wells his job directing this movie. It was in his actual suggestion and even insistence that Wells got hired as a director. He was originally just supposed to be hired as an actor.
No highway branching off the way it does. Hey!
That's all right. I
gee,
can find a way.
His cane! I forgot to give him his cane. He really needs it with that game leg of his. They ever tell you how he got it, huh?
What, Kane?
No, his bad leg.
Who are you talking about?
Captain Quinlan!
We're getting another little kind of, it seems to me, pun about Citizen Kane, the cane that gets left behind here.
None of that. This is some extra material that, again, is in this version, but not in, I think, some of it. And one of the things I think is superior about this version, even though there's more material not by Wells, is it gives you a clear sense both of the plot and of the layout of the places, including the border town. Just in terms of what happens here, in the original version, I think it was much more confusing, because it is a kind of complicated plot. This is a scene that actually, that's a Wells regular, Gus Schilling, who's in Citizen Kane, who's in Lady from Shanghai, who's in Magnificent Ambersons.
I think he's in more American films than any other actor with Wells. But he always plays these little tiny parts.
That's right.
And this fellow, Billy House, was somebody Wells was very fond of. He's in The Stranger.
Yes, and he's also in Fountain of Youth, I think a TV pilot.
That's right.
So he was an old vaudeville comic.
He's been playing around with the boss's daughter.
And I've referred to Psycho. You may notice this fellow in the back seat sitting next to Wells is Mort Mills, and he's the fellow who appears on the roadside as the cop who stops Janet Leigh in Psycho. So that's another connection.
Oh, wow, yeah. He's quite good in this film, I think.
Who got you this job?
My lawyer, Howard Franz.
Grandy's lawyer.
Gus Schilling's, as far as I recall, he didn't play in a lot of other movies, but he's always tiny but very memorable in Wells's films.
Yeah, and there's even a kind of, when they talk about his big ears, for example, it's a kind of, it's almost like this kind of affectionate abuse of the, I think, that they like to have with Wells's repertory company.
What's wrong, Farnham? You short of dynamite?
This is another sequence that I'm pretty sure was not in the original
you can really
version.
see that we're back with Harry Keller again because we're using a process screen, and those other shots have been very powerful for being photographed in an actual automobile as it's driving down the road. Now we're not. Here's the crane again. We'll see some more flamboyant uses of it later.
What's wrong? What are you following us for? Get out of the car.
Well, that man can't take it out of his own car. What's the big idea?
The isolation of where we're going to is very important, too, compared with the previous scenes.
I think it can't be emphasized enough that Wells's favorite camera lens was the wide-angle lens. And here he's using an extremely wide-angle lens, which distorts the world visibly, makes it look like we're looking at it something like in a funhouse mirror, some bizarre
it's the
strangeness.
185 millimeter. And Wells claimed that the only reason why he used it is because other people didn't. That he said it doesn't express any special thing about my personality. It's just that because this is not used enough by other people, so I use it a lot. That's what he claimed in his interview with Kind
One of the
Cinema.
things, we were talking about the first time we saw this film. When I first saw this film, I was crazy about it because of how much it differed from all the other Universal films in the 50s. They tended to be in that period, Tammy, Tell Me True, those kind of movies, or there were some very good
movies.
Yeah, there were some very good Douglas Sirk movies made at Universal in this period, and Jack Arnold made some good B horror movies at Universal. But on the whole, the studio was quite bland, and we think of the 50s as a conservative period, but in the middle of the 50s, when things like this happened, they were very, very exciting.
Yeah, it's amazing when you sort of although recently there are some more films of social protest, but it seems like when you look now, there are many more films of social protest in the 50s than there were, in actually more contemporary times. So even though films seem like they're freer politically, they may be more inhibited.
Yeah, but not just at the political level, which is important, but also at the aesthetic level. Wells is aesthetics are more radical. That very shot that we're looking at right there is something unusual in a
Yeah, with the way
Hollywood movie.
and the way that character is introduced through that on the left is very strange. This was a largely improvised part, by the way, with Dennis Weaver, who Wells discovered in Gunsmoke, I think.
That's right. Dennis
or was
Weaver,
it Wagon Train or something? It was one Western show.
It was Gunsmoke, and in Gunsmoke he played a countrified fellow with a bad leg who was the sort of Gabby Hayes to Matt Dillon's Roy Rogers, I guess, on that show, that very popular show.
And it's very interesting that part of what makes him such a crazy, Wells called him like a Shakespearean fool, too. But that he's also epitomizes all this stuff about sexual repression that is very crucial to what's going on in the film all the way through.
Exactly. It's
almost like he is Shakespearean as a character, because it's almost like he personifies all these currents that are going on elsewhere.
Something I read that he wrote about working in this film, he said that the direction Wells gave him was never let anybody get in front of you.
Yes.
And as a result, I mean, I don't know how you can keep people from getting in front of you, but he slinks along the wall. Everything is very exaggerated. Manny Farber says he looks like a spastic woodpecker. And
moves like a jackrabbit, too.
And this is interesting if you compare this scene with the equivalent scene in Psycho, where Hitchcock's technique is classical and understated. Everything here is extremely overstated to the point that it's going beyond any Hollywood convention of realism. And this may be one reason why audiences were uneasy with this movie, or thought it was arty, or didn't know quite what to make of it. It's breaking the rules of what we normally think of as a movie.
Well, and of a character. I mean, he's so strange because he's a coward, and yet he's totally aggressive about being a coward.
Yeah, it's as though everything that could normally be suggested is here. It's like a dig with the elbow in the ribs.
Under arrest, Mr. Grandy.
Yes, he is.
Now we're getting to what's going to be, and you can talk about this. This is going to be the sequence that Wells shot on the very first day of shooting.
It's two shots that are each probably the two longest shots in the film.
That's right. And this goes back to what you were saying before. People always talk about the opening shot, the crane shot in this movie, but it is this scene we're about to see that's a really remarkable long take. It's just that we don't notice it is because the camera isn't moving enough.
Of course, the studio did notice, and he did it to impress them on the first day of shooting to show it was like 12 days of the script in one shot.
Yeah, he got way ahead of schedule, and they loved him for it. Yeah. You know, this room is going to get, I've written this before, but it's going to get about as crowded as that shipboard in The Night at the Opera. There are plenty of actors in here, and the actors have to move to a precise spot so that the depth of field can reveal characters in the background, and the staging and the blocking of the action here is significant.
Yeah, apparently they had to actually have walls moving up and everything off screen in order to do all the mise en scène. It was very, very complicated, but it was rehearsed a lot, and they did it in a day, just like they did the opening shot in a night. I think it took a lot of preparation.
Vargas.
Yes, Captain.
Got my orders, Vargas. I'm supposed to extend you every courtesy. I don't mean you do the entire...
This, by the way, is one of the scenes where the confrontation between Vargas and Quinlan is most dramatically forceful. And when I was speaking before about how Wells likes to pose this liberal character over against the quasi-fascist character, in this film, I think it works extremely well because Heston is a big man and sort of Shakespearean in the same way Wells is. So they're like equivalent actors facing off against one another.
Yeah, very like a heroic contest. These characters, we are often forgotten. They're never remembered much as actors or anything. They're very circumstantial, even though everything pivots around him, certainly.
Introduce myself. I'm Miss Lineker's attorney.
Shall I introduce myself?
Yes, Mr.
I'm Manolo Sanchez, and I haven't got any attorney.
You two been sharing...
One of the nice things about the scene, too, is not only the way the characters are moving around, but the way the volume and intensity of speech of the characters varies. Wells is always kind of speaking very low, very soft, whereas Sanchez here, the guilty man, is almost hysterical, wringing his hands, his voice, he shouts. And then we're going to get some more characters who come in and get animated. And that sort of playing off against the casual and the wild gives a interesting tension to this scene.
Yeah, and there's the class differences are very significant in how they're played up in this. And the Spanish versus English, which becomes a big issue.
Speak Mexican.
Tengo entendido que no derechos aquí.
Eres cobarde.
This is also significant that Quinlan has spent most of his life in this town and he doesn't speak any Spanish whatsoever.
Yeah. I'm sure he's just as unpleasant in any language.
Unpleasant? Strange?
Speaking of the nightmarish qualities of this movie, in this scene, he says, "I'm the very best shoe clerk the store ever had." He says when he meets Marcia that he's been at her feet ever since. Later, we're going to be told that a little old lady's foot and shoe was found on Main Street after the explosion, and then the evidence gets planted in a shoebox. There's a crazy motif about shoes and feet running through this, in addition to everything else.
That's all he said. Also, he told me he thinks he's in for some sort of third degree. I assured him he had nothing to worry about.
Can't you go in with Vargas? Maybe you don't know.
It's beautiful the way that this is sort of like organized rhythmically and almost musically. The dialogue, the way it slows down, the way for emphasis, the way it speeds up again.
That reference to, he says he thinks he's in for some kind of third degree, and we've just seen him hit the suspect. That's going to come back to haunt us later in this movie.
Yeah, actually, there's something coming up on the soundtrack, which is not in the original release version, which is quite crucial.
Yeah.
When you hear, actually, Sanchez being socked by Quinlan off screen. Very vital piece of information that we do not get in the original version of this.
Notice
that
that
was released.
the camera has followed him into the bathroom. We see the box fall in the bath. The camera is completely turned around now and ready to go back out.
He could even be innocent, you know.
This sequence was in the original version, but that thing on the soundtrack where he gets socked off screen was not.
Yeah.
So it was a different sound mix.
But we're going to hear that much later in the film. Here we actually saw Quinlan slap Sanchez.
We saw him that earlier, that's right.
And we hear Sanchez say that he fears third degree.
Crew's working for Lineker.
Amigo, I think you're onto something.
Well, it's quite an apartment for a shoe clerk. Who pays?
This is unusual too, in the fact that we're again, as in Kane, seeing ceilings, which is not something that even at this period we're probably seeing in that many Hollywood films.
Yeah, the whole lighting style here, the acting style, it varies with anything you would see in an ordinary Hollywood movie.
Well, just because he speaks a little guilty, that don't make him innocent, you know.
You can show motive, yes, but what you need a bit...
And we're going to get some more characters coming in.
Oh, there's my coffee.
Joseph McBride, I think, makes this nice point that didn't you bring me any sweet rolls? Didn't you bring me a donut? These touches give him a sort of Falstaffian quality. And again, even though he's the villain, they humanize him.
Yeah, and make him comic a little bit, too.
This is not my country, that's all.
Now, it's interesting. This scene, when he goes out, is the first cut we have. It's only, basically, all the sequence on the inside is only in 2 shots. But this is the end of the first one.
We're about to see a lady crossing with a baby carriage, but also that car coming in is going to be important. The way that the crane makes us aware of various things on the street are good.
Excuse me, madam, could I use your telephone, please?
Right in front of you.
This is a good example of a kind of a grotesque detail. It's not just that the woman is blind, but that there's that if you look carefully at that sign that's up on the wall that says something like if you're nasty enough to steal from, I can't read it exactly, steal from the blind, go ahead, help yourself.
And that's a sign that Wells himself put in the film. He actually wrote.
Who's this?
For you, don't push.
Bush got McQuillan.
So now we have the second long take that goes on. It's quite lengthy, and of course it's the turning point in the plot too, which is very interesting. Just like the first time Wells, well, he did this in Ambersons. He did like a 10-minute take, and in Macbeth during the murder of Duncan, I think there's a 10-minute take. So it's at a pivotal point in the plot. It was at the ball sequence in Ambersons is when he has this. It's almost like charting a very important dramatic movement with a long take.
Why would I be following a cop?
Demiroff is amusing in this scene. He's trying to kind of stay out of sight all the time in it. But I wanted to say something about the fellow on the left, Joseph Kalea. He had been an important Hollywood character actor from the 1930s and 40s. He was in one of the Thin Man movies. He was in Gilda. He hadn't been in a lot of movies up to this point. And in a moment, I'll say something about the relationship between him and Quinlan in this movie.
The person who was supposed to have been cast in that part was Lloyd Bridges, and for some reason they couldn't get him. But Wells was really happy about how he turned out, because it's maybe the performance of his career. It's quite extraordinary.
Bad. Quinlan is about to arrest that boy Sanchez, and...
Oh, Mike, is that why you called? To tell me somebody's been arrested?
This is an astonishing cut back and forth between this glamorous cheesecake of, and here's that sign, the cheesecake of Janet Leigh, employing every Hollywood convention you can imagine, the soft lighting, all the glamour conventions, and she's wearing a negligee or lingerie anyway. And then we cut to the blind lady in the foreground.
It's very similar to Lady from Shanghai when you get these cheesecake pieces, bits with Rita Hayworth, and then you get Glenn Anders, who's this rather grotesque character who's looking at her through binoculars and practically drooling, and it's a way of undercutting these Hollywood cliches.
That's right. You know a lot about the memo that Wells wrote. I think at one point the studio wanted to cut that blind lady out of the film.
That's right, and he argued for it. And what's so interesting about the memo is it actually gives his artistic motivations, which he almost never talked about, except in this case of why it would make it, even though he says it's your movie, Universal would make your movie better if you do these things.
We got here just now, in the whole place.
Oh, well, as I started to tell you, there's no sign to put up outside the door, and I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't be disturbed. Oh, that is, if you're the one who's in charge.
Don't you worry, Mrs. Vargas. I'm the one who's in charge here. Nobody's going to get through to you unless I...
Now we're beginning to get to the scariest moment in the film, and audiences are being invited to fear for Janet Leigh, but not only that, but to fear from some kind of interracial rape or something that might be going to happen. We'll talk about this in a moment.
Yeah, actually, it's more than just two shots, this sequence, but so this is the third long take we've got. But the middle one is not so long.
The fall guy.
Just a minute.
Sure, I'm the fortune hunter who hypnotized Marcia, who made her kill her father for his money. Boy, if I had that kind of power, I wouldn't be where I am today, believe me.
Kalea, I was going to talk about him on the left. He's been established, and increasingly so as this scene goes along, as Quinlan's most loyal assistant. And we discover that he's also Quinlan's best friend. We know that something troubling in Quinlan's past. We don't know exactly that he used to be an alcoholic, that he's eating candy now. And this old man here on the left, he loves Quinlan, and that'll become very important for the part.
Your money? What would you do, Vargas?
The question is, what did you do?
Yeah, what did you do, boy?
Well, you know what I did, Captain Quinlan. Marcia and I...
Here's one of the many places, especially in this scene, where actors talk over one another or they bite the cue, stepping on one another's lines. This is all very deliberate. Wells liked that kind of practice. He liked to vary the voices.
It's quite remarkable because we never miss an important line, but it almost sounds like that there's more than we should be.
He very much told the actors exactly where, on what syllable to come in, and that's the way he handles it.
It's a technique I'm sure he developed partly on radio, too, when he was able to do that with crowd scenes and things like that.
I wasn't breaking no laws. I was just... I don't even know these people.
You know Vargas, don't you?
When Wells was interviewed about the making of this film, he said that the message of the film was, and I'm quoting him here, the policeman's job is to enforce the law, not to write it. And I think he was referring to events around the civil rights era where Southern policemen refused to enforce the law. And in this case, he's dealing with a character who thinks he can make the law. And we're going to hear in a moment Vargas say a variation of this. A policeman's job is only easy in a police state. We expect all the villainy that's going on here. We're on Heston's side. But as the film goes along, we'll see the Heston character becomes a little more like Quinlan.
I don't even know this Sanchez.
All right, boy, come in here. Now, in English, just how much dynamite was it you stole?
What good...
It's interesting that they're focusing on just a close-up in here rather than what they're actually finding. It's a very unusual kind of...
Well, I think it's because they want to emphasize, or Wells wants to emphasize, the reaction of Vargas here, who knows that box was empty. And so he's having to make a decision here. He knows that evidence has been planted.
Sticks of dynamite!
No! No!
Well, Hank has done it again. He's nailed his man.
Thanks to you, partner.
Me, sir.
Kalea is great, the way he gets so animated and excited.
I promised Chief Gould that I'd keep you informed, Vargas, so I'm doing it. This is it. We've broken the case. Rudy Lineker was blown up.
Notice with this deep focus how he's planning exactly what character's face can be seen in the background. People have to stand at exactly the right spot, enter in, take a step forward.
And yet it feels loose. It doesn't feel rigid
Exactly.
the way it's directed. That's one of the things that's so extraordinary about Wells. He turns it into music, not into kind of regimentation. Although it must have been really carefully planned.
You to the electric chair.
We don't like it when innocent people are blown to jelly in our town.
It's an old lady on Main Street last night picked up a shoe. The shoe had a foot in it.
It's amazing how quickly this film got off the ground from the, they signed the deal to do it right after Christmas, and they were shooting already in February. It was very quickly put together. I mean, Wells wrote the script in only 5 days, apparently the first draft. So it has a kind of looseness, as his post work does, as well as a certain kind of
I think
disciplined technique.
They spent all day rehearsing this scene before they turned the camera. I think Heston talks about this. The studio executives are very nervous about it. They said he hasn't even started shooting yet.
Yeah, until the end of the day.
Yeah, so he's taking a lot of time to know exactly where that camera's going to go, exactly where the actors speak and move in relation to one another.
Easy to blow up as people seem to think. It doesn't go off quite that easy.
You found the dynamite in this box?
Dynamite? Yeah. Pete found it. Told you that.
Captain.
Yeah.
I looked in that box just now. There wasn't anything there.
I know how you feel.
The fact that Grandy is visible in the background during this conversation is significant.
Touchy. It's only human you'd want to come to the defense of your fellow countrymen.
And he's also in between the two of them, which is also significant.
Vargas. Vargas, don't worry.
Why should I worry?
You go right ahead and say anything you want to. Folks will bear your natural prejudice in mind.
I saw that shoebox 10 minutes ago,
Yeah,
Captain.
well, maybe you didn't notice.
I knocked it over on the bathroom floor. I couldn't very well have failed to notice too.
This is one of the places where the two characters look like they're going to get in a fight with each other, and they're of equal size, and that makes the conflict much more powerful.
You framed that boy.
Framed him!
What's the matter with him, Hank? Is he crazy?
Yeah, that must be it, crazy.
Hank, what are we going to do with this Grandy guy? Take him in?
Randy?
It's interesting how he's always cramming as many people as he can into the shots.
This is one of the places where, of course, Quinlan begins to feel a little insecurity. He's been in control up to now. It's the beginning of his decline as a character.
Which is represented also by Grandy beginning to have more of an effect on him.
And that's what's happening here. He's beginning to move out of Menzies' orbit and into Grandy's.
Yeah, there's a wonderful shot coming up of a close-up of Menzies looking at.
Yes, this is one of my favorite shots in the film. It
shows that he loves him. I mean, actually.
Yeah. In fact, what we're going to get in this shot, he's looking out the window as these two characters walk away, and we're going to get 4 images superimposed over each other. We have Menzies lonely, in a sense, because Quinlan is walking away from him, and then we have Susie lonely back in that motel, and we're going to see those two join together here in a moment.
For you here?
Go peddle your papers, Uncle Joe.
Why, you just said it yourself. Somebody's reputation has got to be ruined. Why shouldn't it be Vargas's?
What are you waiting for?
Nothing, Hank.
Well, we got work to do.
Okay, Hank, okay.
It's important, those church bells that you hear in the background, you'll see that the dissolve we're going to get later is also a sound dissolve from those church bells.
I wonder if those church bells were accidental or planned.
I'm sure they were built into the scene.
Yeah, I guess Wells always likes that a director is someone who presides over accidents.
I don't drink.
Here's the close-up.
Yeah, and the reflection gives us 2 images.
Yeah.
And now we're going to get a desert landscape over this image. And then we're going to get another reflection as the blind raises.
Yes.
And the church bells are now changed into rock and roll music coming out of that sound.
Yeah, amazing. Just in terms of simple transitions like that, all the things that Wells can do with it.
Now here, in many years of showing this film to university students, as styles change, they laugh about different things. And one of the things they laugh about is the sort of Michael Kidd version of Hot Rodders in here. But the other thing has to do with a reference to marijuana. Anyway, we'll come to that in a moment.
Look, Schwartz.
Al.
We must show it.
This was a kind of experimental shot because, of course, Wells couldn't come along. He basically sent it off with the two of them off with the cinematographer and said, "Surprise me," you know, like let's see what happens.
What I understand is the cinematographer's not even there. They just strapped the camera to the front of the car, turned it on, and told him to drive off down the street and play the scene.
Right. So that makes it more like almost like a Kurostami method in advance.
And that wide-angle lens is making it look like they're driving in the Indianapolis Speedway or something. It's this bullet effect driving down.
Now, one thing I know Wells wanted to do that he didn't get to do in, for example, a sequence like this is he wanted to use what was on the radio more intricately, like even including summarizing up the action so far in a news report and things like this. And he didn't really get to do that, but that was one of the things he'd hoped to do.
I think we're getting up to the marijuana references, and I just wanted to say that in the many years I've been showing this, when I showed it to students back in the 70s when they were all smoking pot, they thought that the reference to Mary Jane was very funny and they laughed uproariously. Today, if you show it to them, they don't laugh at all. I'm not sure why.
Well, one thing that is very funny is it's very much the way in which this is most like other Albert Zugsmith's films of the period, other Universal, the whole way they're showing these hepped up juvenile delinquents.
It's reefer madness. This is,
right.
It's the scariest scene in the film, but it's also played both for comedy and I would say also for camp, especially a little bit later when Mercedes McCambridge comes in.
Well, I think one of the things that's very interesting, it characterizes a lot of, not all of, but a lot of Wells' late work, is that he was himself in certain ways a rather prudish man. And he liked playing against that. He was almost like a kind of an inhibited Victorian. And so he wound up doing things that were very shocking, almost in reaction to that, because he liked to challenge himself as well as challenge his audiences. And I think that that's always a very important element of his films, that he's always trying to surprise himself as well as... And there's an awful lot, it seems to me, in this film where he's toying with that idea, or doing more than toying with it, actually, using it as one of his active principles, actually.
I brought my lunch.
Eat it now.
Eat it now.
It's certainly the only sequence in an Orson Welles film that uses rock and roll, I think, that I can think of.
Yeah, and movies in this period, including this one, were way behind the curve with rock and roll.
Yeah.
Take it easy, pretty boy. What are you in such a sweat about?
It's a tough rap you get go with these stuff.
It's only that Vargas thing again. Yes, ma'am?
Get me state 1212.
Very good, ma'am. State 1212.
Hey, that's the police department.
Yeah?
Huh?
It's the police, all right. What do we do now?
We'll do nothing. We'll relax and have ourselves a ball. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Vargas, but the telephone is temporarily...
This is one of the places in the film where I think Wells, maybe the place where he takes his, in my opinion, his greatest risk, because he's dealing with very hot racial issues, and they're going to get more...
So you mean playing up the cliches about...
Yes,
is that what
exactly,
you mean?
Yeah. And this is one of the crane shots at the end of this sequence that I really love, when that first drink is taken. It's almost as though Mephistopheles has come here to
This is the only, I think, the only sequence in the entire film in which Grandy is anything like in control of his situation.
Yeah.
He's kind of like a comic stooge in every other scene.
Exactly.
I mean, but it's interesting that these two characters have a lot in common because they both prey on other people's weaknesses quite a lot.
I don't make deals.
Quinlan is becoming at once more dangerous and not as smart and more vulnerable than he was. And, of course, the drinking is going to add to this.
Something wrong out there?
No, nothing we can fix.
Where you get that we stuff? Don't give me any answer yet.
Wonderful use of deep focus here.
You keep talking as though this was some kind of a deal where I...
It's a very interesting thing that Wells said in one of his interviews, that when he was dressing up the part of Quinlan for the first time, he asked Tamaroff what do you think? And Tamaroff said, no, it's fine. Leave it exactly the way it is. It makes me almost think of, like Chaplin when he became the Chaplin tramp for the first time. He was just trying to decide what, who the character was.
I've always felt that Quinlan looks a little like W.C. Fields, but more sinister.
Make him nice and big.
Here's the crane shot I meant.
Oh, yeah.
Make him nice and big, he says. And it's as though Quinlan is now kind of lonely and isolated.
And in his clutches.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get to this part of the film that I was talking about that's playing, as you say, with all kinds of racial cliches.
It's like D.W. Griffith in a way, rape fantasies. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, in fact, when I wrote the book about this, my book about Wells, I said that this reminded me of Broken Blossoms in a way.
Right, yeah.
But I forget that we're cross-cutting still here. We're going to come back to it in a moment. This is an amusing scene.
Let's get down to cases.
You know Chief Gould, of course, Mr. Vargas.
How do you do, sir? Where's this so-called document?
I love the way these two guys are shown as opportunistic politicians, and they're all afraid of Quinlan. But I like this shot, too, when they go into the elevator. Heston says, there's not enough room for me. I'll meet you upstairs. And the camera literally rides up with them in the elevator while Heston is running up the stairs, and he meets them when the elevator gets to the top.
He's so important. He can't very well make a formal call on either of you without at least going through his consulate and putting the whole thing on an international level.
Cut out all the fancy talking. What does it boil down to? This Mexican is bringing criminal...
Now the politics between Mexico and the U.S. are coming to the surface, and charges against one of the most respected legal figures in the country. I rather doubt that this old sheriff on a 2-acre turkey ranch is that.
It's all this bluster. It's a very Wellsian shot right there.
Yeah.
That big expansive bed like you get in Codden at Raina's bedroom.
Exactly, yeah.
There. While you're looking at it, perhaps you'll excuse me if I finish a call I've put in. Connecteme con el motel.
Where'd you get this?
From your Department of Records about an
There
hour
ain't anybody
ago.
in there.
It's one of the only few times that he speaks Spanish.
That's what you're calling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know who owns the Mirador?
June 18th.
This is another good example of the way that the actors step on each other's lines and sometimes overlap. And again, this has all been very carefully orchestrated.
For work on his ranch. Simple coincidence.
Mr. Adair. Hello?
Yes?
Mirador? My name is Vargas. I'd like to speak with my wife, please.
I'm very sorry, Mr. Vargas, but your wife left definite instructions. She's not to be disturbed.
The sexual plot and the legal plot are both coming to a climax here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's almost like an opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of like class and prestige.
Yeah.
It's really a very subversive view but a very cogent one on how politics works, you could almost say, how corruption works.
You know what the boys are trying to do, don't you? They are trying to get in there. They want to get the master key.
To get back to the business here about the kind of imagery Wells is employing, he has garbed Janet Leigh now in a sort of little girl's frock, making her look, where she's provocative in all the other scenes in the film. Here she's completely innocent and she's being sort of lit by this light that makes her look extremely white. As you say, it goes back to D.W. Griffith, and that's a daring thing for Wells to be doing in a film that's really critical of racism. I think in a way, I don't want to say that it's coming from Susie, but it's like the audience's racial nightmares are being played with in this part of the film.
This is the only time when the sequences in the motel room where Janet Leigh's cast on her broken arm had to be removed in order just for verisimilitude. This is Mercedes McCambridge, who's just very briefly in this sequence.
Yeah, and maybe most audiences don't recognize her, but she always jumps out to me. She was a great actress, and she's playing this sort of butch member of a hot rod gang, and I always find it amusing, a joke almost in the middle of
and she's a good friend of Wells. She also turns up in the other side of the wind, actually.
Drink on my own beat.
Bartender, give him some black coffee, quick.
Now, this is one of the scenes, Jonathan, you were talking to me about earlier. It's a scene where we're learning something about Quinlan's past. It's in this scene, right?
Yeah, and it's a little far-fetched. The one thing where I think it's a bit far-fetched, when he somehow says that he lost his wife before World War I. If you start dating it, it seems a little bit of a stretch. And it's also, it's a kind of a motivation that's sort of stuck in a screenwriter's idea, which is one of the more awkward things in the film. It's just basically trying to say why he frames people because the man who killed his wife got away. And it also sounds like a kind of, like a stuck in like an idea. It doesn't really...
The man who strangled her was a half-breed. So it brings in the racial issue again. But in truth, the world we're looking at here, people aren't made racist by some individual event. The whole culture is racist. And the whole thing, and very obviously, visually, this is made clear in the film. It has to do with the domination of one group over another.
Yeah, so I think in a way what you're saying, what one could say about that detail is it's almost one of the few shards left over from a conventional murder mystery. Even if whether it was or wasn't in the novel, it's one of those kind of elements that you could see somehow managing to survive.
And to me, Wells himself may feel funny about this sequence because he underplays it so much. He almost throws it away.
Last killer ever got out of my hands.
Where are you going now?
Where do you think? To Senor Vargas's meeting. He wants to fight dirty. Okay. That's the kind of fight he's going to get.
Perhaps.
Perhaps what?
Perhaps he honestly thinks that Sanchez is guilty.
Of course he does. No perhaps about it.
And one thing that's kind of curious about this sequence when Wells comes into it, Quinlan, is the robin's nest, which apparently was some kind of accidental thing. I don't know if it turned up on the set or something, but it was a last-minute decision to integrate it in the scene. It's very it's another kind of strange detail that just sort of comes out of left field.
Now, it's never made explicit, but it's clear that these two locals, the two politicians, are afraid of Quinlan. They're nervous about him. He may hold something over them.
Yes,
but that's
like
never,
J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, but that's never made explicit. And one of the interesting things about Quinlan is that he's clearly not wealthy. The other two at least have some level of prosperity. And while Quinlan cheats, he doesn't cheat for money. He doesn't cheat for money. And this is the great scene. Confrontation.
Job is tough enough.
It's supposed to be. It has to be tough. A policeman's job is only easy in a police state. That's the whole point.
I love the way Wells turns and rolls his eyes when that which is the very message of the film.
Yes. That's his dialectical spirit right there.
Yeah, he steals it. This comic reaction.
These drovers use at the motel.
Oh?
And here's your nest with eggs in it.
Yes, I'm checking out now and joining her. Do you have a reason for asking, Captain?
No.
There's also one kind of nice comic character touch in this, which I'll get to.
What do you know? Mother pigeon in her nest.
Pigeon, not robin, I guess.
Captain, you did buy 17 sticks of dynamite.
You tell your story, Vargas. I don't have to answer your questions.
The hired hand at your ranch says he
My
used
ranch?
15 sticks.
It's what you call an expressive object.
And what I like is after you taking the handkerchief, he pockets it. He doesn't give it back.
Dynamite, Quinlan. That leaves 2 sticks missing, and 2 sticks were found in that shoebox.
He's just asking, Hank.
But he does go give away his badge.
Well, this gesture scares them.
We're letting him ask.
Oh, Hank, wait a minute. 30 years pounding beats and riding cars, 30 years of dirt, crummy pay.
Oh, there's a deliberate echo of Kane in this, too.
Yeah.
When the voters of this...
Exactly, yes. And in fact, what Quinlan is doing right now is performing. He's putting on a show about he's going to walk away, and he refers to the people of this county, and now these guys have to start acting real loud in order to persuade Quinlan.
Now you backed him up. Me? You stood by.
Yeah, it's a kind of a relay of pretense.
I tried to stop him. Do you realize what Vargas has done? He's marrying hundreds of fine men. Men ready to give their lives.
Have you caused enough trouble? Are you satisfied? I want you to apologize.
To Quinlan?
And to Chief Gould.
Would you like me to get down on my knees?
If you have any decency, you will, yes. You'll crawl.
Mr. Adair, I won't give you the chance to test your authority in this matter.
I actually think that J. Edgar Hoover as a reference may not be entirely amiss, apart from the sudden sheriff.
With you. Son, tell me, where can I find the records of Quinlan's old cases? I'll show you. I'd like to get back to my wife.
It's interesting that nobody much mentions Schwartz usually in this movie, but he's almost like the only sane voice of reason, in a way.
Well, but he's
kind of like our surrogate in a way.
In a way, but I think at the end of the film it becomes a little more ambiguous about that.
Now I guess I can talk.
What do you mean, Hank?
Well, all I wanted to
Once again, we're aware that Susie is in danger, and Vargas keeps saying, I wish I could call my wife.
Isn't he in charge of some kind of cleanup here on this side of the border? Narcotics, mainly?
Narcotics. He's a drug addict. He's got that young wife of his hooked, too. But good. If I hadn't seen that hypodermic myself.
Hypodermic? You saw it?
I just said so, didn't I? Sure. That's how come he happened to imagine all those crazy things. It's typical.
Now what Quinlan is doing is trying to deal with Vargas the way he's always dealt with his opponents, by framing them. As a result, the plot is going to take a turn in which Vargas becomes less like a law officer and more like a man like Quinlan bent on revenge.
I don't ask you to believe it. I can prove it. I know it isn't my department, but I'd like to show you I'm not talking out of the back of my neck. Just be careful, huh? Chief, I'll be very careful.
This takes guts, Al. Standing up to your boss this way.
After today, amigo, you can do me a favor. Help me look for an office.
How's that?
Hank Quinlan's famous intuition might still turn out to be better than yours. If so, my intuition tells me I'll be going
So far, we don't really know for sure who's responsible for that explosion, and we tend to forget about the explosion as this plot goes along and develops.
Yes. What's very curious about this, when people actually wrote, in fact, even Pauline Kael actually wrote that this was just a thriller, you know, a good thriller, but a mere thriller. And you think, it's not even the solution to the mystery is the least important thing about it. So much of a throwaway that there's even some question whether we do know the answer.
Yes.
People think we do, but in fact, we've already seen police brutality, as you pointed out, so anything could be beaten out of a suspect if they want. That's the... waterboarding is all about. That you get them to say whatever you want them to say.
When I first saw this film, this was an especially daring film. It's one of the few times I'd ever seen it. I think Johnny Belinda qualifies, but few times that an American film tried to suggest rape. And that made it a very disturbing scene. And the sadistic way it's set up, the fisheye lens where the character licks his lips. I've said earlier we had this reference to that.
Yeah, they try to deal with it later, though, by saying that nothing really happened. It was all, you know, so that there's a kind of
Exactly. Well, they couldn't do it. The production code wouldn't have allowed them to make it rape. But for
it's
all
amazing
practical
they got
purposes,
away. Yeah. It's amazing they got away with this much.
Is Captain Quillen there?
No, Sarge.
Hey, Donna!
I'll be right there. Now, what would Hank Quinlan be doing?
So typical of Wells that he always gives you more than one piece of information in every shot. Is always sort of this whole universe inside of a shot.
Yeah, he makes the audience do a little more work, and he appeals to their sense of wit.
There's more than just implications of rape. There's also the idea that she's a lesbian.
Yes, yeah.
Or this,
I want to watch,
she
says, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so astonishing that this could be happening in a film that's that is in favor of racial tolerance, whereas
Well, it's what's known as working both sides of the street.
Well, yeah, but I don't think Wells was a hypocrite about it. I think it has to do with the complexity of it. He's making the audience face its fears in some way.
That's right, and face its own racism.
Yes,
I think the point is not just to make racism as other, but something that is so endemic, as you say, and is through all of society. It includes the spectator. So he's making you acknowledge how much of it is in you when you're watching the film.
Another great transition where that door slams and then we go in here.
Now, this is a sequence that's very interesting in terms of the memo that Wells wrote. There's a close-up that happens of later on in the sequence. Be watching it. That's missing from the re-edited version because Wells said that it was very unflattering to the actor. Now, the reason why I mention it is when that close-up is taken out of the film, the entire character of Menzies in the whole film changes. It's quite extraordinary, but if you see the film this way and the other way, he becomes a much more heroic figure without that close-up. Because in this film, when we get to it, it's coming in just a minute, it sees him as a defeated man. And when he decides to betray Quinlan, it's for principle in the other version, where in this it seems like because he's broken.
See, I read that close-up differently than you, and that may be one of the reasons that I've always thought the close-up worked. I thought it was very stylized, but anyway,
I like it. I'm just saying that it's so interesting, the kind of way it ecologically affects the whole rest of the film. That's the thing that I find so interesting, unconsciously.
But I see how, this is the shot.
This is the shot.
Yeah. You see, the way I read this is his grief and despair over what Quinlan has done. It's not that he's a beaten man, but he doesn't want to. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my interpretation, because all that Wells said was it was unflattering to the actor, and that's why they should cut it out.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is that it's very interesting, for better or for worse, how much it changes the whole film. That's what I find so interesting, and it taught me something I hadn't really realized to the same extent, of just how you change one shot in a film and everything else is different, at least if there's as much going on in the film as is going on in this one.
What about Quinlan?
This is like a sequence from the trial also, when you have all those files and everything.
What about all those people he put in the death house? Save your tears for them.
Up to this point, Vargas has been the righteous character in the film, the man of integrity. But now his wife is going to be attacked, just as Quinlan's wife was attacked. And Vargas is going to behave as the film goes along in ways that are somewhat like Quinlan.
What seems to be the trouble? The lights.
This is the place where I think, I've always felt that reference to the Shakespearean Fool, where Dennis Weaver is most like that in this scene for me. It's the way he kind of drifts off into a babbling monologue.
I'm gonna fix them. They got another thing coming. It ain't my job to fix them, even if I know how. I'm the night
show
man.
me, please, to my wife's cabin?
I think it was actually suggested by Bazin, and Wells picked up on it, actually, when they were interviewing him about this. But I think the Shakespearean qualities are always important. I mean, you can even see things about echoes of things like Othello, in terms of the plot and the whole idea of betrayal, and it's there are many Shakespearean themes that are in Wells' non-Shakespeare films. Obviously,
I think this film has, to some degree, has Othello in mind, and later in the scene, I think we'll see an explicit reference to Macbeth. The Shakespearean quality also comes from this thing we've been talking about, where the chief characters are given their own head, as it were. You never feel that they're being brought in. Oh, this is the character who's going to represent the good point of view, and this one the bad point of view. They have some degree of what Keats called negative capability in talking about Shakespeare, the idea that the dramatist is not pushing them into molds. He's making them more beyond our ability to categorize easily.
And they're certainly not there just to make plot points either.
Comes around at all. I'm the night man. There was that party.
There is exposition going on in this sequence, but it's almost like it becomes incidental. And this is one of the things that I think probably worked against the film, that it was hard to follow for a lot of people in terms of all of its details. And in fact, one thing incredible about this film is it was released without any press shows. It was just dumped by the studio, which happens with with other films of Wells too, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the studio was in financial trouble when this film came out, and it got a pan in Variety, and the studio was nervous about it, and they never really gave it much chance to be seen.
And I think they were kind of a little tired of the project, because I think even though things started off well with Wells, he wound up sort of alienating people. Heston said to me, you don't run out on a studio when things are still in negotiation, when he went off to Mexico. And of course, I always thought it was funny, because they said, could you let this editor work alone? He said, okay, and he went to Mexico to shoot another film, which was not what they meant, apparently. So I think there was a certain kind of way in which, because it went through a lot of changes, obviously, and this preview version that we're watching is really just one stage in that evolution.
This can't be my wife's room.
This ain't her clothes, huh?
Now, the ordinary sort of bad American melodrama, the character we sympathize with here, the Heston character, some horrible violence has been done to his wife, apparently. We don't know what exactly has happened yet, but we can imagine. And normally the American movie then will turn into a kind of Dirty Harry style movie in which vengeance and getting the bad guys what they deserve because they've done something to us will happen. But this movie seems to be taking that. It raises those emotions in us, but then it complicates them as we go along.
Right, and then we realize that we can't entirely sympathize with Vargas because he's beating up innocent people or whatever. You know, it's like he's like a character run amok.
You didn't take it. What would I want with the gun? Well, somebody wanted it.
This shot, it always looks like it should be on a stage, like Shakespeare to me.
Yes, it's very much like a...
This belongs to anyone.
Where are they?
People should be aware, I guess, in case they're not, that these night scenes are really shot at night. It's night for night photography, which means that the actors are posed against this black limbo all the time.
And Wells preferred shooting at night, I think, because it gave him a sense of more freedom. Right. A little bit out of the studio couldn't keep him watch if they were shooting at 2 in the morning, you know.
Yeah. Again, and I think this has something to do with the skill of Russell Meddy, the photographer here, but the sense of various times of day in this film, I think, is always very good.
This is like, in a way, to me, the scariest and most upsetting sequence in the film.
Yes, I agree.
And Wells even admitted, well, it goes on later, but it's the most sexually perverse scene. Mm-hmm. You could almost say that almost exists in Wells' oeuvre.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just because of and he was saying that when he actually shot it with Tamiroff, how they had to get through it, but they all knew what it was about, and they didn't discuss it. It's a very upsetting sequence, I think, and the one that, in a way, is the scariest, too, I think.
Even though the film is later going to tell us that Susie was not really raped, that all of this is a show for
we were just told that by them, yeah.
Yeah, yes, that's right. We've just been told. That's not what visually the scene says. The scene is about...
her being having been ravished, yes.
And you were talking about the plot a moment ago, about audiences having difficulty following the plot. I may be unusual in this way. I need narrative. But very often, especially in this movie, the movie is perfectly clear to me at the stylistic level, and the meaning is carried in the style.
Yes.
So that if I get confused about the plot, so what? I always know what this film is about.
What's very interesting, though, is the idea of all these simultaneous actions going on can be traced all the way back, in a way, to Wells' fanatical love of Joseph Conrad. You know, the idea of, because you also get it in Faulkner, you know, you get all these things going on and in one place at the same time. And then you're sort of like, through cross-cutting and so on, you're getting all of that kind of sense of depth. But this is where this version becomes a little bit better, because you see more shots connecting certain places to each other. So you get a little bit better idea how Tanya's bordello is related in relationship to other places and so on, where it seemed much more disjointed to me, always. Whereas some people, of course, like that disjointed quality. So you could argue for that too. But I agree with you about that the style makes for the coherence, but I think it helps to kind of like be able to follow the narrative line too. Because there's so much going on in it, literally. I mean,
I'm not saying that we should ignore the narrative, but I mean, when lost, I think you can always find yourself.
The vice boys will do that. Who's that? Who? Turn around. Get the phone. The phone. Now, dial 1212. It's the police station. Go on down.
The winking lights are quite amazing in this sequence, the way all that they do for this scene.
These kind of blinking lights are a movie cliche. They back pretty far into the 40s, but Wells used them so well in this scene. And I think it's because there's no fill light. Everything practically goes completely dark when the lights go down. This is also one of many places in the movie where Quinlan becomes this kind of creature of contradictions. He's been this shambling guy who looks like he has difficulty even walking across a room. But in this scene, he becomes a really terrifying, swiftly moving, strong, dangerous man. So he has these oppositions.
Yeah, he's like he's really become a monster in this sequence. And it's almost like a horror film.
Give me a seat. Hello, Pete. Of course it's me, partner. Any news yet?
The scientist still hasn't broken.
What? Vargas's wife? A narcotics rep?
Oh, one of the boys who was on this wild party gave me the buzz, see? Just relay it to the vice boys as anonymous. The Hotel Ritz, room 18. And the way I hear things got a lot of control. Don't be surprised what they find.
But what about me, Hank? What do I do?
Keep after him. Break him. Break him!
Now, the last instructions are to break him, and we know what that means. At least it's implied what it means.
Yeah, so I think we can't really give too much credence to people who say, oh, well, it turns out that Quinlan was right, and just because a character says it. We don't know. We actually don't know, and it doesn't matter. That's not the point of the movie. Wells actually underlined that in interviews. He didn't care who was actually guilty. The whole point is whether one does what Quinlan does or not. That's the important thing.
I was speaking about Quinlan's contradictions, his ability to be quick and strong here in this scene, but he's a brute. And yet at the same time, he's a sentimentalist, as I guess a lot of brutes are. The scenes with Tanya are completely different from things like this.
It's also interesting that the way he's actually going to be killing him is the thing was done on his wife, which is a stocking, which doesn't leave fingerprints, and the whole sexual connotation of that, too. So the point is, this is a rape also. That's what's so really... The most creepy thing about it is whether or not the Janet Leigh character is raped. This, in what it signifies, is also a rape, this sequence.
Wells is going to give us the real horror movie effect when Susie awakes from her fevered dream in order to see this Halloween face looking down at her. Notice he completely lifts Grandy up, and he's smashed his head through that transom, that glass transom. Those visual details will be echoed later.
It's a very grim gag on the thing that they notice that's posted on the door.
and that, by the way, is Wells's handwriting.
Yeah, so we can, of course, he does forget something, and that's the turning point in the plot.
This movie has descended now into the pure hellhole. There's, again, a kind of black comedy in the way we've always had this just missing, and Vargas just drives past her as he's saying, "Help me, help me."
Yeah, and you have feeling people are seeing it as a joke. They don't really know why she's there.
There's a lot made with the space, with just missing things or just crossing paths.
It's like out of alignment, everybody out of alignment with everybody else.
Mike!
And this is kind of like going past what was in the opening shot, actually.
Yes. Every cut to a new sequence is astonishing because of the way the tempo varies. Watch when now the angry husband comes in. He's going to pick a man up off the floor, just like Quinlan just did. And he's going to bash his head into that jukebox, which has a top just like that window that Quinlan just bashed.
Yeah. So there are all these rhyme effects in a sense. Although, of course, the motives are quite different because Quinlan's covering up evidence.
He's covering up evidence, but Quinlan sees himself as a man who's been wronged. Somebody killed his wife.
And he's been driven. He's actually, Grandy was responsible for bringing him back to liquor again.
¿Dónde está mi esposa?
There's scenes with violence in this that are really kind of, in our own way, kind of exhilarating, which are also shocking.
This is a truly great shot, here. The wide-angle lens makes it that way. The smoke and the darkness, and the way the camera gets a little ahead of them, and we just rush down that bar. It's a terrific shot. This is, I think, by all odds, the most violent movie Wells made, and his treatment of violence is extraordinary in it.
Yeah, it's more violent than the worst scene in Crimes at Midnight, I guess. Well, that's probably the only other really violent sequence.
Vargas! It's your wife, Vargas.
And this transition here is a great one, too. The way this close-up changes to two figures running.
The Vice Squad.
Quinlan?
You better come outside with me, amigo.
No, tell me what happened.
They found her at the Hotel Ritz, half naked on one of the beds, drugged. There were reefer stubs and a heroin fix. Vargas, the charge isn't just possession of narcotics.
What is it then?
Murder.
There's a little zoom in and a fade to this run. I think that's Wells had such a wonderful sense of space and
movement,
rhythm.
yeah. Yeah, he rarely had actors quite like Heston to work with, and I think it made a difference for this film.
No, Heston is an authentic movie star.
So right now, Susie.
Now, this line is interesting.
Report found evidence of a mixed party.
They found evidence of a mixed party. Now, that is Joseph Cotton's voice, I believe.
It is. You're right. Earlier it was not.
A lot of people don't know what, I guess, coming from the South, I know what a mixed party is, or what they used to call it. It means...
Integrated.
It means an integrated, yeah. There were people of different races at that party. Any Southerner would have recognized that as a racial reference. I think a lot of people today don't realize what the reference was.
No.
Take me home.
Yes. Susie, forgive me.
Menzies' guilt is beginning to...
It's amazing the kind of emotions conveyed on Kalea's face. I mean, a very interesting thing about the sequence coming up when Kalea takes him to this decrepit space is that Wells, while going to take a leak at some point, while making the film, said, hey, this is a great place to shoot, called up Kalea in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning, and said, come over here, we've got to shoot this sequence.
Yeah.
And so he had to drag himself out of bed and come down to this space. Because it was that kind of improvisational style that Wells worked in. This boiler room, basically.
You understand, Vargas? There's no formal charge against your wife.
Oh?
Even the vice course, I'm not pressing anything.
Oh, the fact that Susan won't actually serve time makes everything all right.
I think one of the themes of the film is sort of dirt as a form of corruption, and this dirty town that I've come to clean up. And very soon now, Vargas is going to find himself wading hip deep through a garbage-strewn river.
It's also the dirt of wealth because it's it's associated with oil.
Yeah, and that'll be made explicit for us.
And the fact is, the people who are the wealthiest seem like the most corrupt in a lot of ways, or among the most corrupt.
The irony here is that this kind of rings back on that dynamite found in the room. Here's the clue, but this one wasn't planted.
With Grandy's body.
By the way, this is another sequence that was not in the original version, which is very important because he talks about how much he hates using this surveillance material and spying on someone in order to capture him, which is, and Wells pointed out in the way that the studio edited this film, that they left in all the violent scenes and they cut off some of the moral ones. And this was one of the sequences that I think demonstrates that because it wasn't in the original release.
This shot here where he's compared to the bull and Vargas to the matador, who's on the wall there behind him.
Very unobtrusive, although it's quite obvious that was what's in mind.
He's still just sitting in there. Here,
We've been waiting 3 hours already.
We won't get a word out of this as long as he's near that piano. If you would just go in and...
I also think that in this particular version of the film, the amazingly shot and edited sequence we're about to see comes through more powerfully in this version of the film for me. It's good to bear in mind as we see this scene developing that Wells is editing in the usual visual way, but also this is very interesting sound editing. The way we cut back and forth between recorded sound and I guess what you would call, or not, the sound over the radio and the sound that's supposed to be live.
It's so interesting the way that radio comes back in different forms in so many of the films. I mean, you've got the voice over the radio at the end of Mr. Cotton, for instance. And what's also interesting and what's done with the sound is the spatial effect it has. It has it increases your sense of depth because you're getting sounds on different spatial planes.
But it also, I think, for me anyway, it creates my effect of kind of delirious disorientation because there's a kind of mismatch sometimes between sound and space.
Which is a very important thing in a lot of Wells' later work. Actually, from everything from Othello on, really, you can find it. I don't know if it's quite as much in Macbeth, maybe there too.
It's my job too, Menzies. It's my job. It's my job too, Menzies. You think I like it? I hate this machine.
This is the important speech that Vargas makes where he's almost confessing that he's doing something.
Well, Wells confessed that one of the conflicts he felt personally in this film was that he thought betraying your best friend is just something that was unforgivable. And so even though he sees his own character as the villain and Vargas as the hero, he thinks that what Menzies does is terrible on some level. I don't relate to it quite that way, but at the same time, I think it's sort of like he's obviously more of a tragic figure than anyone else.
Well, it relates back to is it E.M. Forster? Maybe it's George Orwell. I think it's E.M. Forster who says, if I have the choice between betraying my country and betraying my friend, I hope I shall choose to betray my country.
I have the guts to to betray my country.
Yeah.
You've been reading the cards, haven't you?
I've been doing the accounts.
Come on, read my future for me.
Dietrich was always a very powerful presence for me in the movies, and this film is so visibly artificial when she comes in, but yet this is the heart and soul of the movie for me. Again, here, Wells is playing with cliches. What we're getting is the fair lady, Janet Leigh, and the dark lady, Dietrich. Those also play into sort of racial ideas.
Oh, absolutely. And sexist ideas. I mean, Wells is more comfortable, obviously, with the whore than with the Madonna. There's no question about it. You can take your shoes off with the with a whore, not with the Madonna.
Vargas, I don't know if you can hear me over the piano music, but I'll get him out of there so you can't hear.
But at the same time, we feel something for Janet Leigh's character too. This is one of the remarkable things about the film. It's like everybody has their moment. It's not like anybody is really dismissed as a character, except for maybe some of the comic juvenile delinquents, I suppose.
For me, one of the most emotional parts of the film, although this is highly artificial, I agree, is when Dietrich says to Quinlan, "Your future is all used up." Just her very voice, the way she says it. I knew this was a great film the minute I heard that.
And some people have said, it was somehow Wells commenting on his own career, which I think is a little bit facile, because his career was far from over. Just because he stopped making movies in Hollywood, he had a lot more to go after this film. But a lot of people somehow think just because if he didn't make films in Hollywood anymore, he stopped working, which is really a pity. Because the point is, he gave up all the advantages of Hollywood in order to have the freedom of being able to edit his own films. And that was very important, because for him, that was the key to art and cinema, not direction, but editing, because editing was the last word. And he could only get the last word by working outside of Hollywood.
You could use a drink yourself, partner.
You got to answer, Hank. All kinds of things. First, about Vargas's gun.
How do you know about the gun?
He makes great use of these oil wells all around Venice.
There were originally supposed to have been more of them in which got cut out even before, the preview. So we don't know how much there might have been originally. But the point is, they were more integral, apparently.
Yeah. By the way, Russell Meddy, who photographed this film, also photographed Written on the Wind that Douglas Sirk did.
Yes.
And you may remember the oil wells in Written on the Wind were shot right in this very place here. You could compare those two films and see how differently Wells is using the oil wells.
And Zug Smith was the producer of both.
Yes, exactly.
This soon you'll be flapping your wings like an angel. Look out.
In a way, this last sequence is especially the most complex in the...
It is.
Because of all the different kinds of camera angles being used and all the different levels and planes in which we're seeing it.
Yeah, no two shots are the same, and it's screen direction gets changed, sound gets changed.
Look what happened with Grandy.
Partner, nobody ever called me a crook.
Look up there.
See?
I love this shot.
That oil pump, pumping up money.
And what makes it work is that the camera sways with the pump.
Yeah, it's also quite interesting, as you pointed out, that Quinlan, even if he's the villain, is not someone who has a lot of money, unlike these characters played, you know, like the higher-ups in the society. So he's a victim, too, in that sense.
Yeah. Well, the world we're looking at, which is just the most kind of awful, ugly world you can imagine
It's a
in a
cesspool,
movie,
yeah.
is really a world governed by sex and money, or money and sex. And it's in this place on the borderland that becomes most evident, and its ugliness becomes most evident.
Yeah, and of course it's prostitution and police brutality. All these things are almost like everyday things. They're not exceptional. They're almost the norm.
Defend yourself, Hank. You murdered Grandy.
I left my cane by his body. That was short crazy.
All right. Let's start in the beginning. What about Vargas's gun?
I was talking about my cane.
The gun.
I forgot it.
The gun.
It took a while for this film to become sort of a cult film or a film greatly admired. Some people have said interesting things about it. Paul Schrader said that it was the epitaph for film noir. In a way, I think it goes beyond film noir. It's such a blasted-out landscape. It's no longer the kind of seductive black and white that you get in the city films of the 40s. It's kind of looking forward to a kind of more realist, neo-realist way of treating the world outside.
Yes, and I think it's also interesting that in what is Wells' last Hollywood film, he's using things that are more deglamorized than even in the later films that he would make outside of Hollywood, much more.
Yeah.
It's a film of expressing a lot of disgust, actually.
Yeah. Just to quote another statement about it, Charlton Heston himself said in an interview, he didn't think it was the greatest film ever made, but he thought it was the greatest B-movie ever made. I don't think it really qualifies as a B-movie. There's too many big stars in it.
Now, when he says a B-movie, that all he means by that is not to be, you know, a film that gets press shown. This was not press shown.
Exactly.
That's what he means by B-movie.
Or he means a genre movie, you know, a thriller of some kind, and a black and white thriller at a time when color was beginning more and more to take over the industry. And Andrew Sarris said, I've always liked this remark, that for people who saw this film fairly early on, it's a movie that changes your mind about what a movie can be. If you see this in the context of ordinary Hollywood at the time this film was made, it seems astonishing.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, I have only myself to blame. It as I'm saying, when I saw it as an early teenager, for me it was just another thriller. It was an unpleasant one, I remember. It must have left that impression, but not... I just didn't understand thematically all it was doing, probably because I was having... I don't know why. I'm not sure. The point is that I think Wells, throughout his career, did things that people were unprepared for. And this was why he was never commercially bankable, because by the time people caught up with what he was doing, he was on to something else. So people said, this is no Citizen Kane when it came out. And then when F for Fake came out, they'd say, well, this isn't Touch of Evil. You know, it's like, by then they'd caught up to Touch of Evil.
I got a feeling he's someplace around here. Close to me. I got a hunch.
Why, Vargas, why should he...
You sound kind of nervous, Pete. You know, I game leg. He's starting to talk to me. Vargas.
Not only is Menzies betraying his best friend, but Quinlan is going to kill his best friend.
Yeah, and there's a sense of Vargas having to get into the cesspool himself in order to get this. The fact that he's in this kind of oily waste is significant in order to get this.
Bug for him. A microphone. Don't lie to me.
All right. No, you better give me that gun.
Where is he? Where is he?
How did you figure to frame Vargas with it?
Framed? Who's been framed? Where is he? Vargas? Where is he?
Hank, look,
I'm talking to Vargas now. Vargas? You hear me? I'm talking to you. Through this walking microphone that you to work for me.
No, I ain't working for Vargas. I'm
working for the department, Hank. Better give me Vargas.
The garbage heap here is going to become significant. We just saw a zoom into that device, and they're used sparingly. This is one of the few films by Wells that uses a lot of zooms.
Yeah, they're very few, very rarely used. There's a few, I guess, in for fake too, but he did not generally favor them at all. Because I think the way he regards space is kind of contrary to use of the zoom.
The blood on the hand here, I've always thought, I associate with Macbeth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Trying to wash it off.
And of course, when you try to go to somewhere to wash it off, you find there's only dirty water.
Yeah.
That's the universe this film is set in.
And I love the little twisted piece of metal that we're going to see in a moment, in one of these shots, a shadow, I think. There it is. That sharp point.
Yeah. You know, Wells was afraid of getting typhoid when he shot this film.
I don't doubt it.
Well, Captain, I'm afraid this is finally something you can't talk your way out of.
You want him back?
Still trying to jockey for power.
Killed him, Vargas.
Come on now. Give me my gun back.
You don't know, just tell me. You killed Pete. The bullet is from your gun.
This is the darkest thing, in a way, Quinlan does for me on the thing. He's just killed his best friend, and he's trying to pin it on somebody else.
Anyway, I never believe I killed him.
The gun?
You're resisting arrest.
How could you arrest me here? This is my country.
This is where you're gonna die.
So it's interesting where they are in terms of the border is always an issue throughout the film.
And we're surprised by it.
I don't want to shoot you in the back. Unless you'd rather try to run for it.
In a way, this kind of detail is very much a generic type of thing, but yet it has carries much more power, I think, here than it usually does. The last gasp, killing someone at the last moment.
I think the last shots of the film are in danger of just being, the romantic couple get together at last and drive off into the sunset. But a couple of things happen. One is the irony here. When the Mort Mills character says, Quinlan, just what? Quinlan was right all along. Sanchez really was guilty. And in fact, as we've been saying, we really don't know who committed that crime.
Yeah,
Sanchez could have been guilty, but we don't know.
It's following the Hollywood rules. We need closure now. Close the case. Leave the theater. It's like it's okay, everybody.
And the other thing that saves it from just being just a conventional ending is Marlene Dietrich. The film has a self-referential quality.
Apparently, wait a minute. I think this car is the same kind that is carrying a couple of blows up at the beginning.
Yes. Well, Universal obviously had some kind of a product agreement with Chrysler Corporation, because that's what the cars are. But I think it's supposed to remind us of that car.
Pete, that's the second bullet I stopped for you.
Now, that whole thing about him having stopped the bullet is only clear in this version, because the scene that explains it was missing in the original release version. So it was a line that made no sense to anybody when they saw the film originally.
His famous intuition was right after all. He framed that Mexican kid Sanchez, but he didn't even need to. The kid confessed about that bomb. So, turns out Quinlan was right after all.
Isn't somebody going to come and take him away?
Yeah, just a few minutes. You really liked him, didn't you?
You know, I think this ending is also Shakespearean because you have minor characters have the last lines.
Yeah. As I say, Dietrich really saves the film for me from being conventional because she's Marlene Dietrich. And I always feel that this film is both absorbing and yet it's a movie that makes its own moviness apparent. So
yeah, although this line used to get laughs, I know. Because again, it was kind of considered camp. But at the same time,
maybe it did. It doesn't. It moves me every time I hear it.
Yeah, and it goes back to Cain about you can't judge people ultimately. Where, you know, that the human personality is a mystery. That's what Wells is saying again and again. Regardless of what moral conclusions we have, people are mysterious.
I just like it. Maybe it's because I'm too much of a fan. But when Dietrich turns around and says "adios," that's good enough for me.
It's very moving. Yes.